I looked after my friend's grandkids, but I got tired, so I'm gonna leave them with you. Think of it as practice. Despite being put on strict bed rest due to a threatened preterm birth, my mother-in-law thrust 3 kids upon me, claiming they're her friend's grandchildren, and began to nap on the sofa. The kids run around the house non-stop, not listening even when I call out to them. In my desperation, I called my husband at work for help. However, he merely responded, "They're family, so you gotta help out your mom," pushing me aside. Out of sheer desperation, I made another call. And as a result, karma caught up with my mother-in-law. My name is Jessica. I got married to Mike, whom I met through a mutual friend, and am currently expecting our first child. Mike works for the company that his father, Bob, runs, and we live in an apartment near Mike's parents' home. There were discussions about living together when we got married, but Bob suggested that I might feel more comfortable if we had our space. However, since we moved just a 10-minute walk away from my in-laws, my mother-in-law, Susan, started visiting us quite often. Being a sociable person with numerous activities and classes, Susan initially seemed to be trying to bond with me. Stopping by after a walk or shopping and having a short chat was manageable, even if it happened a few times a week. But gradually, her visits became longer, often requiring her to step inside our house. Recently, this has become the norm. Having her over means preparing tea and snacks, and I can't relax or neglect the household chores. Though Susan says, "Make yourself comfortable," it's not that simple. Her visits began to feel like a burden. But I still wanted to maintain a good relationship. It was tough for me to ask her to visit less often. I hoped Mike would speak to Susan, but when I approached him, he merely said that there's no need to be formal with family. He even suggested I learn cooking and household chores from Susan, indirectly expressing his dissatisfaction with me, which was disheartening. There were times I thought it might have been better if we lived together. But that would mean enduring Susan's never-ending stories daily, which were frankly exhausting. Susan doesn't really have any substantial content in her stories. They're often about topics she saw on TV or friends of hers that I don't know. She just talks non-stop. Bob doesn't listen to her, so I guess that's why she comes to my place, hoping for someone to listen. Now that I think about it, even Mike never really paid attention to Susan's stories. Any attentive listener would do for Susan. Proof of that is when she has her social club meetings and can chat to her heart's content, she doesn't come to my place. One day, as I was thinking of ways to reduce Susan's visiting hours, I discovered I was pregnant. Being my first pregnancy, I wanted to find the right timing to tell everyone. However, upon hearing the news, Mike, perhaps too overjoyed, immediately informed Susan and Bob. I appreciate their happiness for us, but I haven't even reached the stable phase of my pregnancy yet. Mike suggested I could get some advice from Susan. He even asked her to check up on me, leading to her visiting even more frequently, sometimes staying for lunch or even dinner. Bob is the only one who seems concerned about my condition, whereas Mike and Susan just keep saying that moving around would help with an easier delivery. They don't help around the house at all. When morning sickness hit harder than I expected and I wanted to lie down, Susan would still come over and meddle with household matters. Maybe it was the stress of those days, but during a routine checkup, I was diagnosed with a risk of preterm birth and was told to rest. The doctor advised me to get support from my family for household chores, but I wasn't sure if that was feasible given the current circumstances. But considering the baby, I knew I couldn't just keep quiet. I decided to talk to Mike as soon as he gets home, ask him to help with chores, and stop Susan's frequent visits. I was hopeful that Mike would understand. But as soon as I laid down on my bed, the doorbell rang repeatedly. I wasn't expecting any visitors, and considering the incessant ringing, I instantly knew it was Susan. She probably knew about my doctor's appointment and timed her visit accordingly. I had just been told to rest. And even if I could stay in bed, with Susan's incessant talking, I wouldn't get any rest. So, I decided to pretend I wasn't home. After ringing the bell for a while and getting no response, Susan finally seemed to give up. Feeling a bit guilty, I closed my eyes hoping to get some sleep. However, to my surprise, I heard Susan's voice inside the house saying, "Are you here?" I heard footsteps approaching, and suddenly my bedroom door opened. "There you are. Why are you in bed in the middle of the day?" I had locked the front door, but somehow, Susan was inside. "Susan, how did you?" Looking puzzled, she flashed a key in front of me. It was a spare key to our house, and it seemed Mike had given it to her without my knowledge. I had repeatedly asked Mike to tell Susan to limit her visits, and I was infuriated to learn that he'd given her a spare key instead. Unfazed, Susan continued to criticize, mentioning how dusty my room was. I informed her of my risk of preterm birth as told by the doctor. "I need to rest, so I can't entertain you today. I'll be in bed," I said, hinting that she should leave. But she didn't take the hint and showed no signs of concern. She proceeded to open a window and called out, "Come on in." After that, I heard loud footsteps, and 3 energetic boys I'd never seen before appeared. They were 3 energetic young boys. They all looked somewhat similar, suggesting they might be brothers. While they didn't enter the room immediately, they peeked in from the doorway. "I'm babysitting my friend's grandkids, but handling all 3 is quite tiring. I'll take a nap in the living room. You can put them to sleep here. It's a good practice for when you have your child," Susan said nonchalantly. With that, she told the kids to nap with me and swiftly moved to the living room. The boys, interpreting this as permission to enter, rushed into my bedroom. In no time, my bedroom, with only a bed for Mike and me, turned into a playground. The boys showed no intention of napping and began jumping on the bed and playing tag. No matter how much I tried to calm them, they were engrossed in their play. In this chaotic situation, I decided to call Mike for help. I called his work phone and explained the situation, asking him to come home as soon as possible. "Mike, the doctor said I'm at risk of preterm birth and told me to rest. But these kids are running around non-stop. Can you please come home?" I was genuinely scared at that moment. The kids' actions were becoming more boisterous, and I feared one might accidentally bump into me. I was on the verge of tears, dreading any potential harm to my unborn child. However, even as I pleaded with Mike in a tearful voice, he seemed not to grasp my fear. "You can't expect me to just come home," he said in exasperation. "Mom's been handling those energetic kids and she's tired. Why don't you help out? Think of it as parenting practice." Shockingly, Mike echoed Susan's sentiment and hung up the phone. Despite my repeated attempts to call him back, he didn't answer, and the children began trying to jump from Mike's bed to mine. I faced the kids and couldn't help but blurt out, "Stop!" in a loud voice. The children looked at me with surprised expressions, and while they did stop their bed-jumping antics, they continued to chase each other around the room. How long were these kids going to be here? When would Susan ever wake up from her nap? Feeling helpless, I clutched my smartphone in despair. It was then that I spotted a certain name on the screen, and in my desperation, I called that person. By the time Susan finally woke up, it was already late in the afternoon. I guess I overslept. I was exhausted from playing with the kids. She yawned and got up to find the kids. But the previously noisy kids were now silent. Susan peeked into the bedroom where she last saw the children, but no one was there. When she finally made her way to the kitchen, she was in for another shock. The 3 children were quietly sitting at the dining table, munching on snacks. Lying on the couch, watching over them, was me, and standing next to me was Bob's sister, Kate. "You finally woke up," said Kate when she noticed Susan's entrance. Indeed, in my desperation, the person I'd turned to was Kate. Living just an hour's drive away, she came immediately after I called her. Since the wedding, Kate had taken a special liking to me. Apparently, Kate had always wanted a daughter, but never had children of her own. She seemingly saw me, her nephew's wife, as the daughter she never had. When I shared the news of my pregnancy, Kate, having been a nurse and having worked in pediatrics for a long time, reassured me, saying, "If you ever need help or advice, don't hesitate to reach out." Never did I expect that challenge to involve Susan, but Kate, without a hint of annoyance, had come to help. The children, who had been running around non-stop, immediately calmed down upon Kate's arrival and soon took their afternoon naps. Exhausted from their playtime and under Kate's guidance, they drifted off quickly. The children had been playing non-stop and were undoubtedly exhausted. In the silence of the room, where only the soft breathing of the sleeping kids could be heard, I finally let out a sigh of relief. After the kids took their nap, I filled Kate in on everything that had transpired. First, Kate expressed concern for my well-being, then she promised to talk to Susan as well. "From now on, you just focus on the baby in your belly and take care of yourself," Kate advised. Her words reassured me, and I opened up about my anxieties and what I foresaw in the future. After chatting with Kate for a while, the kids began to stir from their nap. Kate then explained to the children that I was expecting, encouraging them to be gentle and understanding. As I had suspected, the kids were siblings. The two older brothers remembered their mom being pregnant with their youngest brother and were compassionate towards me. The youngest, following his elder sibling's example, tried his best to be considerate. I realized these were genuinely kind-hearted kids, and it warmed my heart. I apologized for raising my voice earlier, and the children apologized for running around and jumping on the bed. We all made up. As we all sat down for snacks and began cleaning up, Susan finally woke up from her nap and came looking for the kids. Despite her surprise at seeing Kate, Susan started making excuses. According to her, she had brought the kids to my home to give me some practice in child rearing. She assumed that since the kids were tired from playing, even someone inexperienced like me would be able to put them to bed with ease. Hence, she had taken her nap first. "I can't believe you called Kate. I didn't think you'd be so overwhelmed by the kids," Susan remarked, implying that the fault lay with me. But since I had already confided everything to Kate, Susan's excuses only exasperated her. I was too flabbergasted to even counter Susan's claims. Oblivious to our disbelief, Susan kept rambling with her justifications until a call from a friend interrupted her. Apparently, the friend, expecting the kids at Susan's house and finding it empty, had called in confusion. Naturally, this friend and I had never met, so the idea that the kids were at a stranger's home never crossed her mind. Once informed by Susan, the friend hurriedly made her way to my house. Upon seeing her grandchildren safe and sound, she visibly relaxed and then apologized to me. She even noticed my pregnancy at a glance and promised to visit again with another apology. The children waved at Kate and me with a hint of reluctance as they left. Although the situation had felt threatening at one point, thanks to Kate, I felt we ended up spending a delightful time with the kids. As we bid farewell to the children, Susan sneakily tried to leave too. However, Kate stopped her and explained the potential risks and dangers of my condition. "There's even a chance she might lose the baby," Kate told Susan sternly, but Susan's only response was, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Despite her friend's apparent frustration at Susan's reckless behavior, Susan showed no signs of remorse. Amidst all this, Bob and Mike returned home. It seemed Kate had informed Bob about my condition, prompting him to wrap up his work early and bring Mike home. "I'm sorry we're late. Jessica, are you feeling okay?" Bob inquired, genuine concern evident in his voice. However, Mike appeared discontented, probably still underestimating the seriousness of my condition. Mike hadn't been helpful with the housework since he learned about my pregnancy and the start of my morning sickness. In fact, when I was feeling especially sick and asked for his help, he would get very upset. He kept saying, "It's not an illness." If he still feels that way, I had no confidence in our ability to raise our child together in the future. Kate explained my condition to all three of them, emphasizing that I needed to rest right now. Before Mike could argue with his usual, "It's not an illness" retort, Bob declared he would take me back to my parents' home. Apparently, Bob had been cautioning Susan about her frequent visits to our home for a while. Susan had been claiming she was counseling me and helping with chores, but she hadn't done any of that. Bob had noticed this and was trying to figure out how to restrain her when today's incident occurred. "You guys being around means Jessica can't rest properly. For the sake of the baby in her womb, Going back home for the birth is the best decision," Bob explained. Even after hearing this, Susan continued to repeat, "That wasn't my intention." To make matters worse, Mike started to defend Susan, saying, "Mom was just trying to help Jessica." He probably thought it'd be a good child-rearing practice. They seemed to get along well in the end, didn't they? The reason we ended up getting along with the kids was thanks to Kate. The thought of facing that situation alone still chills me to the bone, and I had lost trust in Mike, who didn't come to my aid when I called for help. Kate, acting on my behalf, packed my belongings and informed my parents that I would be returning home. Mike and Susan tried to stop me, but I ignored their pleas and got into Bob's car. Bob and Kate kindly drove me to my parents' home. Bob felt responsible for not being able to stop Susan, but I knew I could rely on him and Kate. "I'll talk to Mike when we get home. I hope you two won't divorce, but it's your decision, Jessica. Whatever you decide, we'll support you," Bob kindly told me. I was so grateful for Bob's compassionate words. When we arrived at my parents' house, Kate briefed them about everything. Without passing any judgment about my future with Mike, they warmly welcomed me. When it was time to bid farewell to Bob and Kate, I expressed my wish for them to meet my child, regardless of whether I divorced Mike. After a few months, I safely gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. When the labor pains started, I didn't inform Mike. I had decided to let him know about the birth only after our child was safely delivered. Eventually, I contacted him and decided to return to our shared home. I had initially thought of divorcing him and raising the child alone, but when I saw my daughter's face, I realized she wouldn't exist without him. Naturally, I wanted him to meet her. On the day I was to return, Mike came to pick me up. When he saw our daughter outside my parents' house, he teared up and whispered, "Thank you," to me. Mike and I hadn't been in touch much while I was away, but he seemed to have changed. Our daughter instantly fell asleep in her car seat, allowing Mike and I to have a heart-to-heart talk. It seemed Kate had given Mike quite a stern talking to while I was gone, prompting him to reconsider his views. He hadn't realized how much a pregnancy can affect a woman's body and had dismissed my discomfort as mere exaggeration. Mike told me he had studied various books and prepared to welcome our daughter while waiting for me. Seeing our safely born daughter, he was overwhelmed with emotion and realized how dangerously he had treated me, expressing how scared it made him feel now. "From now on, we'll be raising this little life that can't fend for itself yet." I was happy that Mike understood and shared that fear with me. Mike also informed me about Susan. After I returned to my parents' home, Susan was reprimanded by Kate, much like Mike had been. Given her past behavior, Bob was quite angry with Susan, too. Despite being scolded by both, all Susan said was, "I didn't mean it like that," showing no understanding of my condition whatsoever. Bob decided that if I ever came back, it would be dangerous if Susan approached, so he banned her from our home. Though Susan protested, with Mike's change of heart from Kate's words, she had no allies left. She had no choice but to accept the ban and return her spare key. Later, one of Susan's friends came to apologize. Upon learning I had moved back to my parents, she seemed deeply concerned, suspecting it might have been because of her grandchildren. It wasn't due to the kids, but because of Susan, as Mike clarified. Hearing that, and considering her grandchildren were brought to a stranger's house without her knowledge, she severed ties with Susan. Apparently, Susan met her friend through some shared activity, and now she couldn't even attend that after being ostracized. Despite this, Susan doesn't think she's at fault. She's been causing trouble with other friends, and both Mike and Bob feel they can't deal with her anymore. "Dad might even divorce Mom," Mike mentioned. Recently, Bob has rarely been returning to his family home, and apparently, he's rented a place near our apartment. By the time the story about Susan ended, we arrived at our home. Bob and Kate were there to greet us. Seeing our daughter, still asleep, they smiled joyfully, which warmed my heart. Thanks to Mike and Bob, the house was even cleaner than when I had left for my parents. Mike planned to take paternity leave soon, based on Bob's suggestion. Though I hadn't informed Mike, my parents had mentioned that they'd occasionally visit to check on things. Kate had been keeping an eye on Mike since I went to my parents, but I'm sure he's going to be a good father and husband. I had started to trust Mike again. Though I had once feared for my safety, our daughter was born without any issues. Surrounded by trustworthy people like Mike, Bob, and Kate, I felt confident about raising her. We currently don't intend to let Susan into this circle. Without our permission, she won't be able to see her grandchild. It seems people are gradually distancing from Susan, but when will she realize this? People who don't want to work should really leave. That way, we can hire new employees. I'd rather see younger workers than watching an old lady in her 60s, like you, with a tired face working. I'd enjoy my job more. Ever since the sincere manager John was replaced by the new manager Bob, all he cares about is efficiency, not considering the customers. Furthermore, he condescendingly refers to us veteran employees as old ladies and only seems interested in young girls. He's just insufferable. No one, neither I nor the part-time workers, could have imagined that such things would happen just a month after he took over. My name is Catherine, 63 years old. I currently live with my husband. We have a son, but he's now living on his own. I started working part-time at the local supermarket as soon as my child started elementary school. That was already 20 years ago. The supermarket I work at is a community-based small-scale store, run by manager John, a few staff members, and the rest are part-time or casual workers. When I was hired, I had requested to work short hours, but as my child grew older, I asked for more part-time hours. The supermarket's management seemed to have been going quite smoothly up until now. A few years ago, they underwent a significant renovation, giving the store a beautiful makeover. The size of the store doubled from what it was before, and the variety of products increased considerably. Since then, the business has continued to prosper. I believe the reason for the long-standing stable management is because of manager John's excellent personality. He actively and cheerfully communicates with customers, is kind to the elderly, and is a genuinely wonderful person. It was a very comfortable working environment for us part-timers. However, one day, out of the blue, he announced he would be leaving the store. I couldn't believe my ears. I can't believe manager John is quitting. Maybe he's sick? I'm so worried. Those were the thoughts running through my mind as I finished my shift that day. The next morning, during the morning meeting, manager John himself gave the announcement. I've mentioned this before, so many of you might already know. I've decided to leave this supermarket, which I've loved for many years. The moment he said that, there was a murmur among the employees. Many of you probably want to know why I'm leaving. As some of you might be aware, I've had chronic back pain. It has gotten worse over the past few months, and I've had to visit the hospital multiple times. Since I knew about his back pain, the reason made sense to me. I've firmly decided to step down for now. My wife supports my decision. I hope the employees here can understand and accept my decision. As he said this, a loud applause erupted from the employees. Some even had tears in their eyes. He was indeed a beloved figure among us. I too felt a lump in my throat. Continuing, he said, "My successor will be a man named Bob. If anyone here wishes to continue supporting this store, please do so under the new management." We all nodded in agreement. Then, with his usual bright smile, he said, "Thank you all for everything." The next day, a special morning meeting was held. Today, we have my successor, the new manager Bob here. I'll now hand it over to him. It was the transition time from manager John to the new manager Bob. I was inwardly excited, wondering what kind of person he might be. Then, a tall man stepped up beside manager John and began to speak. "Hello everyone. My name is Bob, and I'll be taking over as the manager of this store. I look forward to working with you all." All the employees applauded in unison. Manager John then added, "For about the next week, due to various handover tasks, both I and the new manager Bob will be coming to the store to work. I expect manager Bob might visit different departments, including the kitchen areas, so I hope you all will support him." Initially, looking at the new manager, I thought he seemed sincere and believed I could work well under his leadership. However, during the period when we had two managers, strange rumors were circulating in our store. Our supermarket became a subsidiary of a certain company a few years ago. This company became our parent company, and the rumor was that the new manager Bob was a relative of the president of that parent company and got his position through connections. To me, whether manager Bob got the position through connections or not didn't matter as long as he fulfilled his responsibilities as a manager. But after the dual management period ended and Bob took over, something unexpected happened. Manager Bob announced he was going to change the store's policy. Since I am the manager now, please follow my instructions. Conversations among employees, and especially with customers, should be minimized. Casual chat and small talk only distract from work. If I catch anyone chatting unnecessarily, be prepared for a lecture. I felt uneasy about these sudden directives. Until now, conversations with customers had led to changes in the products we stocked or adjustments in quantity. Furthermore, the friendly atmosphere where customers and employees could easily chat was one of our store's proud features. But now Bob was demanding a change, and both the part-time workers and the other employees were bewildered. Since Bob took over, the conversations between employees have decreased. Even when communicating about work, we'd check our surroundings to make sure Bob wasn't watching. Also, interactions with customers declined. If caught talking to a customer, employees would later be called aside by manager Bob for a reprimand. This became a daily occurrence. We followed his directives because it was the store policy, but the store's atmosphere only deteriorated. On my day off, I went shopping at another nearby supermarket. Usually, I shop at the supermarket where I work, but I didn't want to see Bob's face, even on my day off. That's when I saw Mrs. Smith, one of our regular customers, shopping there. She was talking to someone, and even though it was rude, I eavesdropped. She was talking about our supermarket. I usually shop at that supermarket, but lately, the atmosphere has been off. Apparently, there's a new manager, and the store's vibe has completely changed. The staff used to be so friendly, but not anymore. I'm thinking of not shopping there anymore. I whispered to myself. Oh no. That was the moment I realized that our customers were drifting away. When I shared this with other part-timers on my next workday, several had similar experiences. Furthermore, in the customer feedback section at the store entrance, there were complaints about the recent atmosphere. There were also online reviews giving the store 1 star, stating they'd never return because of the dark atmosphere. We decided to report these facts to the manager and boldly conveyed our concerns. But Bob refused to change the policy. All of you, who have worked in the supermarket for years, don't seem to understand. If you spend time with one customer, you lose out on other tasks. You still get paid while you chit-chat or do things unrelated to work. I want all of you, especially part-timers, to prioritize efficiency. Indeed, focusing on efficiency might be crucial for running a business. However, not all conversations with customers are a waste of time. Assisting the elderly with packing might not be a direct job responsibility, but taking care of customers is essential. Just when I thought the discussion with Bob was over, he suddenly looked furious and began again. By any chance, did any of you purposely post those negative online reviews? Are you trying to tarnish my reputation? If I find out that any of you are involved in this, I'll fire you immediately. Be prepared. With that, Manager Bob left the scene. Manager Bob completely distrusts us. At the same time, our trust in Manager Bob has dwindled. Other part-time workers looked equally exasperated. A few days passed, and as I was restocking items in the store, I spotted the regular old lady I had seen shopping at another supermarket the other day. I thought to myself, I'm glad she came back. Luckily, the manager was out at that moment. Taking a chance, I decided to speak with her. Mrs. Smith, hello. Lovely weather today, isn't it? Mrs. Smith looked slightly surprised. Oh my, it's been a while since you've spoken to me. I've missed our chats. It felt nostalgic. I wondered why no one spoke to me recently. Apologizing for the recent aloofness, I mentioned that I had seen her shopping at another supermarket and had overheard her talking about our store. Mrs. Smith responded candidly. I've been shopping at this supermarket for years, but lately, the atmosphere has taken a turn for the worse. The neighborhood's been talking. I suppose it's because of the new manager, isn't it? I was taken aback by the speed and efficiency of the neighborhood's grapevine. But as someone who's worked here for years, I couldn't stay silent. Mrs. Smith sighed and continued. I loved the healthy food from the deli section here. But ever since the new manager took over, they've been replaced with oily ones that seem to target younger people. Could you ask the manager to restock the healthy ones? Please. I wanted to say yes immediately, but I doubted Bob would agree so easily. I promised Mrs. Smith I'd try, but fulfilling her request seemed challenging. Later that evening, after Bob returned, I gathered the courage to approach him, even though I lacked confidence. Excuse me, manager. I wanted to discuss something. What is it? Let me guess, another pointless suggestion? If you have time for that, get back to work. Don't you dare tell me how to run things. Bob shouted at me with a fierce tone. At this point, he wouldn't even have a proper conversation. The thought of working with him long-term began to sour. But I wasn't the only one who felt that way. Over the next few days, several part-timers handed in their resignations. However, Bob seemed to have a let-them-go attitude and accepted their resignations without hesitation. He then approached me, smirking. It's easier without the workers who don't want to work. Now, I can hire new ones. I'd rather see younger people working here than watch someone in their 60s like you with a weary face. Apparently, his vision for the supermarket involved replacing older employees with young girls. I couldn't understand his thinking and felt that this would backfire someday. But Bob proved to be even more proactive than I'd expected. He started by advertising high-wage, part-time jobs to local high school and college girls. Attracted by the high pay, 5 girls applied. Bob decided to hire all 5. But these girls wore flashy makeup and shiny piercings, not the ideal look for a supermarket dealing with food. Their language was also coarse, and honestly, the rest of us part-timers were filled with anxiety. Furthermore, Bob was so engrossed in chatting with these girls that he barely worked. Angered by his behavior, I decided to confront Bob directly. Manager, this has to stop. Because you're not working, we're bearing the brunt of the workload. Plus, if you continue with these strange reforms, we'll lose our regular customers. At this rate, this supermarket will go under. Upon hearing this, Manager Bob glared at me and shouted. The regular customers of this store are all elderly and boring. To survive in the upcoming times, we need to prioritize younger, trend-sensitive customers. Otherwise, we'll fall behind the times and soon be out of business. Part-timers who don't understand business should stay out of it. Bob's attitude became even more arrogant than before. Now, he didn't even use polite language with us, the older employees. Bob then questioned me sternly. By the way, I've received a barrage of complaints about your work attitude lately. Apparently, you're always chatting away and not getting much done. Customers see it. Now, apologize. I was shocked by Bob's statement. Why should I apologize to you? And do you have any proof of these numerous complaints? Ignoring my query, Bob yelled. Just apologize. If you don't like it here, leave. My patience with Manager Bob had reached its limit. I no longer felt the desire to work at this supermarket. All right then. I'll quit, effective immediately. Thank you for everything until now. With that, I left the supermarket. After I left, other staff and part-timers also resigned. Eventually, only Bob and the student part-timers remained in the store. He probably enjoyed the environment, being surrounded by young girls. But I wondered what would happen when they went to school. Could he manage the store on his own? It wasn't my problem anymore. I found a new job at another nearby supermarket. There, my many years of experience were appreciated, and I was warmly welcomed. A month later, I visited my former place of employment. Curiosity led me there, but I was mainly concerned about its state. Suddenly, I heard a loud female voice from inside. "I can't stand this attitude. I'll never shop here again." Exiting the store was Mrs. Smith, whom I had encountered previously. I was surprised by Mrs. Smith's outburst. She approached and said, "Oh, Catherine. Are you working today?" "No, actually, I've left this supermarket." Upon hearing this, Mrs. Smith looked shocked. "What happened? Was there some trouble?" I inquired about the reason for her earlier outburst. "I bought some deli food this morning, and it was rotten. When I complained, the manager told me it was my poor handling. If you've left, then I have no reason to shop here anymore. It used to be such a good store." I felt sympathy for the visibly upset Mrs. Smith. Entering the supermarket, I found it completely empty, except for Bob standing alone. To my surprise, there were no customers at all. Inside the store, manager Bob stood alone, looking dejected. I muttered to myself, "Serves him right." I considered taunting him with, "It's pretty quiet in here, huh?" But ultimately decided against it, feeling a bit sorry for him. Suddenly, Bob began making a desperate phone call. "Please, I need your help." I had no idea what he was seeking assistance for, but he looked quite panicked. As I roamed around the store, Bob approached me. "What did I do wrong?" "After you left, other employees also left, and even the young girls resigned. At this rate, this store will really go under. My relative, the company's president, confronted me harshly yesterday. I just don't know what to do." In response to Bob's desperate plea, I simply said, "You reap what you sow." Bob collapsed, bursting into tears. Suddenly, two men entered the store. One of them was John, the former manager of the supermarket. "Isn't that Catherine? Long time no see." "It's been a while. What brings you here today?" Even though it had only been a month, having seen him daily at work made it feel much longer. "Well, we've decided to bring in a new manager to turn this supermarket around." The man beside John spoke up. "Nice to meet you. I'll be the new manager of this supermarket. My name is Lucas. I believe you've heard about me from the company president and former manager John. I look forward to working with you." Bob nodded slightly. Lucas grew up in the heart of New York and is a very sincere and compassionate man. We believe he's the right person to improve this store. Bob looked up, his face full of uncertainty. "So, what's going to happen to me?" "By order of the company president, you'll be returning to the parent company, effective today. Naturally, you won't have any managerial position. You'll be on the same level as a new hire." "But, why?" Bob was deeply shocked to hear he'd be demoted to a regular employee. I thought he should be grateful he even had a position to return to. Then, the new manager, Lucas, turned to me. "I'll do my part as a manager, but to start from this state is honestly tough. I'd really appreciate it if seasoned part-timers like you could lend your expertise to help restore this store." John also said, "Please." I replied, "If there's an opportunity to return, I'd gladly accept." And so, I rejoined the supermarket I'd served for many years. Several of the part-timers who had quit during Bob's tenure also returned after hearing of his departure. Now, with manager Lucas at the helm, we're working hard, listening to the local community, and striving to make the supermarket better. There's been a gradual return of customers. And it's uplifting to see. Meanwhile, I heard Bob was working hard at the company owned by his relative. Apparently, he was quite unhappy being treated the same as a new employee. It turned out the earlier claim about numerous complaints regarding my work attitude was entirely fabricated. This falsehood had come to light with the company president, and Bob faced severe repercussions. I thought, well, he got what he deserved. I now thoroughly enjoy my work. It's astounding how different things can be just because of a change in management. I realized the importance of having the right person at the top. I hope this supermarket continues to be a wonderful place that brings smiles to the local community. With that commitment in mind, as a veteran part-timer, I'll do whatever it takes, and today, like every day, I'm working with enthusiasm. My request was flatly denied. It'd be fine if it's the storage shed. I screamed inside, "Don't make a fool of me." Our house is fairly spacious, and if the rooms were tidied up, there would be no problem having my father live with us. Truly, my husband holds feelings for me and my family that are less than that of a pet. Well then, I will sincerely clean up the storage shed and renovate it. Even the storage shed can be used just like a regular room if it's cleaned up. There's meaning in living with my father now. Aaron was like, "There's no way I'm doing such a thing. Why do I have to renovate for your father?" I recalled the major renovation we did to make sure my mother-in-law, who visits sometimes, would not have trouble staying over, even installing a bathroom and toilet, just like a hotel. I won't rely on such a demon-like man anymore. I made a decision. My name is Vivian Westhill, 52 years old. I help with the company my husband runs. My son, Matthew, has left home, and it's just the two of us living together. My mother-in-law sometimes comes over, but since her house is nearby, she doesn't live with us. How I met my husband goes back almost 30 years. I hate to say it myself, but I was famous for being good-looking in my hometown. My mother passed away in a traffic accident when I was in middle school, and I was living, helping each other out, with my father. Although I was invited out by many men, they were nothing but a hindrance to me. I had a dream of becoming an accountant, and I was working hard towards that. Despite this, I did have a boyfriend. I had a boyfriend of the same age, and we would secretly call each other and go out to eat after part-time. Though I was popular, I had no intention of dating anyone else, and never did. The only people I could let my guard down with were him and my father. He alone appreciated not my appearance but my seriousness and true strength, among other aspects of my personality and way of thinking. I think we would have become a couple even if I wasn't same appearance. That was the kind of relationship we had. However, one day everything changed. When I returned home, an unfamiliar family of 3 was in my house. Seeing me, my father made a troubled face. I must have been more surprised. An unknown family introduced themselves like, "We are the Westhills." Hearing the name Westhill made it click. A famous rich family in town. I wondered why they were in my house. "Welcome home, Vivian. Mr. Westhill here wants to take you as his wife." I was so shocked that everything went white before my eyes. A wife? Marriage? What are you talking about? I had never seen these 3 before. Everyone knows they hold significant influence in town as a wealthy family. Yet, the talk of me becoming a bride was unbelievable. "Nice to meet you, Vivian. Our Aaron has fallen for you at first sight. He insists on having you as his wife." My would-be father-in-law began speaking. Though it felt unreal being talked about like that, they didn't disappear no matter how many times I blinked. Even being told such a thing, I've never met him before. "So why do I have to marry your son?" "Well, you see, your father owes a large amount of debt. We thought maybe we could help you out." Looking at my father and me alternately with a look of disdain. This was the first I'd heard of my father's debt. "Well, take your time and talk it over with your father. We'll come back in a week to hear your answer." Could our fate be decided in just a week? It didn't seem real. I thought things like this only happened in dramas, and I couldn't believe it was happening to me. Stunned, I watched as the 3 of them left after bowing their heads. "Dad, what's this about a debt? What's your relation with those people?" My father turned to me with a pale face, drained of all blood. "Vivian, I'm sorry. It's true. I was lonely and started drinking and gambling. Before I knew it, the money was gone, and I began borrowing to cover it." Everything I heard since coming home was beyond my capacity to accept. "Debt, why didn't you tell me? I understand you were lonely after Mom suddenly passed away. But having a debt..." I couldn't think calmly. Naturally, I couldn't even talk about it calmly. This was indeed out of the blue. As far as I could remember, my father never got drunk or angry from losing at gambling. I didn't even know. Mr. Westhill invited me and introduced me to a place. With Mr. Westhill's face, we could drink on a tab, and I didn't even know how much the bill was accumulating. The same thing with gambling, he let me buy lottery tickets together, and it just piled up. My father is truly a good person, not knowing how to doubt people. It must have been easy for someone like a scam artist. They must have been scheming from the start to trap my father and have their way with me. Hold on a second. What happens to you if I don't marry their son? I asked in desperation, wondering if there was any other way. I will probably be chased by debt collectors. I might even be sent to a work camp. I couldn't stop trembling at those words. There's no such thing as work camps these days. Can't you just keep working hard to pay it off? I asked, clinging to a shred of hope. Sorry, Vivian. That's impossible. The debt collectors might start contacting my workplace. I might not be able to work anymore. I was completely cornered. It was enough. There was nothing more to talk about. I wanted to vent all these feelings of frustration, humiliation, and anger, but I couldn't do that to my father who has always taken care of me. I packed my bags and decided to go to the Westhill family right away. There was no use worrying about it. It wasn't easy to make this decision, but considering the increasing interest on the debt, I couldn't cling to my home anymore. There was no other way to resolve this but to marry Aaron, and before I changed my mind, I quietly left the house. I arrived at the Westhills' home late that night. I thought it might be imprudent, but I boldly knocked at the front door. You're early. Seems like you're blinded by money. You're just like everyone else. I wanted to scream in frustration. I didn't want any money, and I didn't think I was unhappy because I was poor. Well, whatever. You're mine now. Seeing you with that pathetic boyfriend, I thought I'd make you mine. His words treated me like a doll. I felt utterly objectified and disgusted. I've left everything in the past. I look forward to being with you from now on. With a forced greeting, I entered the Westhill household. After that, everything progressed in a whirlwind. I don't remember much, because I felt as though all my emotions had disappeared after being betrayed by my trusted father and breaking up with my beloved boyfriend. It seemed like a grand wedding with a local famous person, and many people came to celebrate. All I remember from the wedding is the haggard look of my father, who had not been gone for very long since I left home. Seeing that made all my resentment towards my father vanish. So, accepting this as my fate, I decided to change my outlook and enjoy my married life. But that was the beginning of hell. Of course, I had to do all the housework and was made to help with the family business. I worked from morning till night. Add to that the pressure of having children, and my mental state was taking a toll. My mother-in-law constantly nagged and was like, haven't done the big cleaning yet? Not just unable to have kids, but this too? My husband, who was kind at first, now didn't care, showing an indifferent attitude. It certainly was not the sweet married life I had imagined. You're completely useless. A woman from the club would be better. Just quietly do your job and chores. I was treated like a housemaid. Soon I was pregnant, but even with severe morning sickness, they were not sympathetic. You're getting fat. Just do your chores and work properly. I don't know why I married you. I had given up on being acknowledged in this home. No matter what I did, a wife from a poor family would never be seen as more than a servant. It was frustrating, but for the sake of my unborn child, I had to endure. Then I gave birth. With the birth of a boy, my husband, who now had an heir, hardly ever came home. When he did return, he reeked of strong perfume and alcohol. He must have been at clubs. However, I was mostly occupied with raising my child, so his absence was rather a relief. My son, Matthew, grew up healthily and was easy to raise. My mother-in-law continued to annoy, saying Aaron would have done better, but I preferred Matthew not turning into such a worthless man. And my kind-hearted Matthew wanted to become a doctor. When he left for university, I felt a void in my heart. To fill that void, I decided to dedicate myself more to my work. Around that time, my father-in-law who had treated me as a human being passed away. My mother-in-law moved to a condo near the downtown area that my father-in-law owned. She came into my father-in-law's inheritance and is likely going to enjoy her time with friends. On the other hand, with the loss of my father-in-law, who always supported me and cared for me like my own father, I began to miss my father and started contacting him. Taking advantage of my husband's indifference, I started to talk to my father just like old times. Though it was difficult to speak without making my father feel guilty, one day he looked serious. When I asked what was wrong, he said in a resigned tone as if nothing could be done, that he was diagnosed with malignant lymphoma and was given 6 months to live. I was utterly shocked.
No way, Dad. That can't be. You're so lively, it's impossible that you only have half a year left, just when we could finally be like a father and daughter again. I can't bear the thought of never seeing you again.
But my father just smiled kindly and nodded. I don't want to leave my father alone. I will ask my husband to let him live with us in our spacious home. I'm not ready to give up, but at least, I don't want him to be alone. My father said he was happy just hearing those words and left with a gentle smile. For the first time since getting married, I decided to confront my husband. That night, as usual, he came home drunk, with the smell of perfume. Seeing me awake and waiting for him, he looked startled.
What's the matter? Don't tell me you want some affection?
It seemed he hasn't changed his view on women being objects. I looked straight at my husband and said, "Aaron, I have something important to talk about. My father has been diagnosed with terminal cancer and has only 6 months to live. I want him to live with us in this house. Of course, I won't let it be a bother to you. We can just use one of the vacant rooms in the house. That's okay, right? You will listen to such a request, won't you?" Since my husband is hardly at home, there should have been no reason to object. I took it for granted that he would agree. But an unexpected reply came back from my husband. "Just leave that half-dead old man alone. I'm not gonna let someone like that into the house. It'll ruin the house's atmosphere." "Absolutely not. If you want to do that, you can leave. I have no intention of living with a sick person." My request was flatly denied. I felt like I had fallen into a gaping hole in the ground. "If you want, the shed is fine." I screamed inside my heart, "Don't mock me. Our house is quite large, and there is no problem if my father moves in after cleaning up a room. We can live without facing each other. My husband really holds feelings for me and my family that are less than that for a pet. Well then, I will seriously clean and renovate the storage shed. If the storage shed is cleaned, it can be used just like a normal room. There is meaning in living with my father now.
There's no way I'm doing such a thing. Why do I have to renovate for your father? From now on, accompany me and take proper care of me."
Recalling the major renovation I did for my mother-in-law, who visits sometimes, to make a bathroom, toilet, and washroom just like a hotel, I decided not to rely on such a demon-like man anymore. Since then, I have worked more than ever and went to see my father when I had the time. There were days when he seemed to be doing well and days when he seemed to be doing badly. I couldn't feel alive every day unless I saw my father's face. I was only praying for my father's illness to be cured. Then, maybe my prayers were heard as my father was still alive after 6 months. A miracle might be happening. I felt like a bright light was shining in. I started to live positively little by little. About half a year after my father's confession, my husband came back with a pale face. I sensed that something serious had happened because my husband had never come back early since we got married. "Hey, sit down. I have important news. I was told that I have cancer and my life expectancy is short." Come to think of it, my husband had been looking pale lately. I thought it was due to drinking too much alcohol or lack of sleep. Strangely, I was not shocked. It was completely someone else's problem. Besides, everyone should take care of themselves.
"Oh, you were like leave that half-dead man alone, right? I'll do just as you said. You were like if you say so, then leave. As you said, I'm leaving. Oh yes, I've found a lawyer for our divorce matters."
I left the room without looking back. I decided to leave suddenly, but I did not regret it at all.
You don't have a penny, do you? Where do you think you're going leaving this house? You won't be able to live a luxurious life like you have been. You have been living on everything I have worked hard for. You inhuman.
Does he still think that I have been living in this house for money? I had been brainwashed by my mother-in-law and husband's verbal abuse, thinking that I had to be here to protect this house. Since hearing my father's terminal diagnosis half a year ago, I have woken up and started thinking that I can't go on like this. Since then, I have been preparing my mind to get divorced and leave the house at any time.
I've worked so hard for you. Are you a demon, leaving me behind like this? Don't you have even a shred of gratitude towards me?
Although my husband continued to shout something in the background, it had nothing to do with me. I never wanted a wealthy life. Being able to eat 3 meals a day and having a place to sleep was all I needed. I returned to my room, packed only the essentials into my suitcase, and left the house. Whether my husband was in trouble or not, it didn't matter to me. I sent the email I had drafted noticing my resignation to the president straight away. I wanted to settle everything regarding my husband and the Westhill family. I had been supporting him since he barely worked, but this was the end. In fact, since discussing my father's situation half a year ago, I had been in contact with a divorce specialist lawyer introduced by the company's advisory lawyer. I talked about everything regarding our nearly 30-year marriage, starting from events before our marriage. The lawyer just nodded, quietly listening to my story. However, when I mentioned that I had been working for the family business without pay, he was genuinely surprised. It would amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars in salary. After finishing my story, he was immediately like the divorce should be easy. I also had taken photos of emails from women, and had noted down serious moral harassment, providing plenty of evidence of my husband's fault. Of course, since I got a smartphone, I had also recorded his verbally abusive remarks. That was enough, but the lawyer also brought me photos of my husband's infidelity for free. He promised that everything would go well even if I didn't do anything, telling me to feel like I was on a big ship. So, I didn't need to answer the angry calls from my husband, and the lawyer would solve everything just by me throwing it all onto him. I was naturally walking with a smile. Among the angry calls from my husband, there were, of course, calls from my mother-in-law. She was probably like, "Are you planning to abandon everything and leave when my adorable son is in trouble? If her son is so adorable, she should take care of him herself. It would be fine for her to return to that house whenever, as a luxurious room, looking like a show home, is prepared for her. But it seems one reason she is panicking is that the company started by my father-in-law is falling apart. Without me, who had been supporting them, and a nearly decorative president who can't steer the company due to illness, things are not going well. My mother-in-law, who has only helped in the initial stages, is useless in the company, unable to even make copies. Even if she shouts and yells, she can't unify the employees and make them look in the same direction. Some colleagues have contacted me, asking me to come back, but I had no intention of devoting myself to the company anymore. Given that, although the company had been cherished as a local one, the number of clients will steadily decrease. I loved my father-in-law, and I felt sorry for letting the company he worked hard to grow decline, as if I were the main culprit. That being said, I think if my husband and mother-in-law had worked as hard as my father-in-law, this wouldn't have happened. I probably wouldn't have quit, and Matthew would have likely considered taking over the family business. On top of that, my husband not only did hardly any work at the company but also seemed to be constantly hitting on female employees and inviting them for affairs. It was suspicious when many female employees resigned. It seems that the women who had unpleasant experiences are planning to sue the company for sexual harassment. Now my husband has to settle all the mess he made in his life. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. God is watching. You get punished for doing bad things. I want my husband and mother-in-law to be properly punished so that those who have worked honestly do not look foolish. As if that wasn't enough, the company was accused of tax evasion by the IRS. Totally by accident, while my lawyer was investigating, several questionable points were found in the accounts. Upon further investigation, suspicions arose that my husband had been embezzling money. Looking back, it was strange that he had so much money to play around with. There wasn't such a high salary for him when I was helping with the accounting. I was too indifferent about my husband. I didn't notice the discrepancy between his income and expenditure. If I had thought about where all the play money was coming from, I would have understood. I vaguely felt that because he was so rich, it was fine to spend as much money as he wanted. In reality, he had been squandering the company's money, and even my salary, which he had transferred to his own account, seems to have been used up by him. Kickbacks for orders, bribery to companies, making decisions for his own benefit rather than for the company, he had dipped his hands in all kinds of evil deeds, taking advantage of the lack of supervision. Tax evasion and special embezzlement, my husband's crimes are not just one. I don't know whether the court's judgment will come out first or if my husband will run out of life first, but I want him to atone for as much as possible. I also started looking at the books half a year ago and copied them to ensure that evidence is not erased, and submitted them to the IRS. The fact that I had been studying to become an accountant came in handy here. To fill the payment gap even a little, my husband sold the company to a major corporation and also sold the large mansion. Because of the rush to sell, it was bought for a song. My mother-in-law is also selling her condo to pay me and the IRS, and they are living in a small apartment complex together. Rumor has it that he has several children from affairs, and payments for child support to the affair partners are also in arrears. He should at least have used contraception properly, but he probably assumed that affairs and illegitimate children were a man's privilege. He might have life insurance, but will that be enough? Even though my mother-in-law is elderly, she seems to have started working because she has to earn money for her son's medical and living expenses. Having looked down on others until now, it's probably quite hard to be seen with sympathy by those around now. The parent and child should reflect on their actions until the end. I received a substantial amount and bought a condo in a convenient and nice location. There, I reunited with my father and started living together. Thanks to Matthew's introduction to a renowned doctor, my father is now recovering, surprising even the doctors. Actually, my father had been living with Matthew until now. I convinced my father, who was thinking of entering a hospice or living alone, to live together at Matthew's place. After I left the house, my father had saved quite a bit of money for me. He was thinking of freeing me once the amount borrowed was saved up. Hearing this, Matthew thought of my father as a more respectable person than his own father and kindly agreed to my unreasonable request. Both Matthew and my father had long hoped that I would divorce my husband, and they were overjoyed when I left the house. I never thought that not divorcing would worry the two of them. Until the condo was decided, I lived together with them and chose a place close to Matthew's place. So even when I started working, he could check on my father when he had time. My father is also trying to bridge the gap with his grandchild, talking about when I was small and about my mother. Matthew seems to be talking about his background a lot. I hope to build a good relationship like this. I started working at the law firm that helped me. I'm not an accountant, but having some experience is a strength, and I'm helping with corporate cases. With advice from other lawyers, I'm studying to get a tax accountant qualification. Age doesn't matter. And my husband was sentenced to actual imprisonment, now he's behind bars. There's no worry about not having money or food, so perhaps it's ironically a good thing. My mother-in-law forcibly moved into a relative's house. Having acted superior until now, she must be getting a taste of her own medicine. I was thanked around town for getting back at my mother-in-law, husband, and their company. I'm newly astonished at the number of people harassed with power and sexual harassment transactions. I was worried that some people might have lost their jobs due to the company being acquired, but it seems to have worked out somehow. I feel everything is moving in a good direction, and I'm savoring the happiness. Thinking that alone was enough, I returned from work to find my father and a man at home. Welcome back, Vivian. I brought someone who wants to meet you today. Do you remember? It was my ex-boyfriend, the only person I truly loved. I recognize him at first glance, even after nearly 30 years. My father was like, as soon as you went to that house, I went to apologize to him. He understood, and had decided that if I escaped from that house, he would accept me immediately. My ex-boyfriend, smiling warmly, was like, Vivian is a hard worker, so I waited for a long time. Matthew also knew about my ex-boyfriend, and it seems the three men were watching over me. I'm planning to live with these three men I truly love from the bottom of my heart.
For a place like yours, it's pretty nice. I guess I could live here with you.
The one who blurted this out at the front door was the mother of my ex-husband, whom I thought I had long parted ways with. While my mother-in-law acted all smiles, she ignored my poor condition and would exploit me for cooking and cleaning, a true narcissist at heart. Her son, my ex, raised by her, also thought the world revolved around him. I couldn't bear it and chose to divorce. Why are these two right in front of me even though I moved to a place they wouldn't know? And then, I was faced with a shocking truth. My name is Catherine. I joined the company fresh out of college and worked hard in the sales department for 6 years. Recently, I've become something of a career woman, being entrusted with leading projects. Because I was so engrossed in my work, my salary had steadily increased. I found joy in performing well and getting recognition, and since I had no interest in splurging on shopping or luxurious trips, my savings just kept growing. I had plenty of security for the future and was leading a fulfilling life until a certain encounter changed me. I attended a high school reunion and reconnected with a man named Bob. We didn't talk much in our student days, but that day, maybe because our companies did business with each other, our conversation strangely began. Bob worked in legal affairs at a well-known company. Our chat shifted from work to mentoring juniors, and then about our own lives, and we quickly became close, even promising to meet again after the reunion. Soon, we began dating and decided to get married within a year. However, after a modest wedding ceremony at a chapel, surrounded by family and friends, I was about to discover a shocking fact. One day, I fell sick. While Bob was concerned for me as I lay bedridden, soon enough, his mother called.
Hello, Mom.
No, it's all right. Just that Catherine isn't feeling too well. I could overhear the conversation between Bob and his mother from the corridor, but soon felt an odd discomfort. Seems like his mother was calling before she intended to visit. Of course, I thought he'd decline. I wasn't bedridden, but naturally, I wanted some rest without any disturbances. However, Bob complied with his mother's wishes and accepted her visit. All right, we'll be waiting. I'll wake Catherine up. Hearing this, I was baffled. Why would he allow her to come over knowing I'm unwell? And even mentioning waking me up? Lost in my astonishment and confusion, Bob returned looking like it was the most normal thing to do. Mom's in the neighborhood and wants to stop by. She says it's just for a short while. I felt bad turning her away. So, Catherine, wake up. Just showing your face will be enough. Of course, it'd be inappropriate for his mother to come over while his wife was in bed. My living room wasn't even cleaned yet, and dishes were still in the sink. Despite showing concern, Bob hadn't lifted a finger to help. Pushing through my discomfort, I hurriedly cleaned up and got dressed before his mother's arrival. Throughout, Bob didn't offer any assistance or even look remotely apologetic. When his mother arrived, I was made to serve tea and set the table, with no consideration for my health. Their conversation was odd, too. They chatted amongst themselves, leaving me feeling isolated while suppressing a headache and chills. Eventually, his mother stayed until dinner. I kept my frustration hidden, cooked the meal, and finally collapsed into bed once she left. Bob has always prioritized his mother. He'd say he felt bad because they lived apart and often brought her gifts or frequently visited her place. I thought it was just him being a good son, but over time, I realized he always put his mother first. This behavior intensified, and just 6 months into our marriage, he completely disregarded me, always considering his mother as his top priority. Bob was, in essence, a mama's boy. Comparing our cooking, always visiting her house during outings, and his mother always indulging this behavior, clearly smitten by her son. I had planned to build a happy married life, but before I knew it, my mother-in-law's shadow was constantly between us. There's a reason she's so indulgent with her son, Bob. It's her spending habits. It wasn't just limited to coffee dates with friends or outings, but also expensive hobbies like traveling and purchasing limited edition luxury brands. Because of this, she often approached Bob asking for money. This behavior shamelessly extended to me as well. I was taken aback by such demands, something I never faced even from my own parents. Having been strictly taught by my parents against borrowing money, I was deeply shocked by my mother-in-law's attitude of taking it for granted. I never gave her a dime, but every time she asked, Bob would hand it over. Perhaps that's why she doted on her son so much. It's only natural to help out when mom's in trouble, right? That was all Bob had to say, even when I brought up the issue. Before I knew it, money exchanges were happening behind my back, and unknowingly our finances became tight. It reached a point where I pleaded, "I won't blame you anymore, but at least don't hide it from me." When I visited my in-laws, to my mother-in-law, I was just a free housemaid. She took advantage of me, cleaning, cooking, even tending to the garden and cleaning windows. Still, I had to oblige for Bob's sake. It seemed like, somewhere deep down, she enjoyed bossing me around. Unaware of these circumstances, Bob never stepped in to help. Instead, he genuinely believed his mother's treatment was making me a better wife. When I stood up to my mother-in-law, Bob, trying to mediate, said something unbelievable. "It seems Catherine's mom couldn't look after her much, so she's just embarrassed now, feeling like she has a real mother for the first time." True, my parents ran an old-fashioned diner and were busy working every day. But I don't hold any resentment towards my mother. Usually, they could have asked their only daughter to help with serving customers, but instead, they let me go out and have fun, taking up hobbies and lessons. A mantra my parents always had was, "Children aren't just tools for free labor." This was in stark contrast to my mother-in-law. I finally confronted my husband. I was defending not only myself but also my parents, who had shed tears of joy at our wedding.
"What your mom's doing isn't right. Just because I'm the daughter-in-law doesn't mean she can boss me around. And I don't want to constantly maintain your family home to perfection. I just want her to leave me alone."
But the response I got from my husband was filled with anger.
"How can you say such awful things about my mom? Thanks to her, you're being a proper wife. Don't make trouble without being grateful."
Furthermore, he threatened with,
"If you keep talking like this, I'll divorce you."
He thrust a divorce attorney's business card at me.
"How about that? I'm dead serious. If you apologize to both me and my mom, we can discuss things."
He had deeply rooted old-fashioned values. In his eyes, a wife was inferior to both the husband and mother-in-law, and she should obey them in everything. Since I resisted this notion, he became confused and furious. He probably thought threatening divorce would make me cry and apologize. But I was convinced that our marriage wasn't happy anymore and that things wouldn't improve. My husband said,
"Think things over while I'm on my business trip,"
and left the next day. Seeing this as a golden opportunity, I immediately headed to a divorce attorney's office. I rushed into the firm and quickly took care of the necessary procedures. While it required various formalities to revert to my maiden name, I took some days off and tried to get everything done while he was away. The notification of our divorce being finalized and my husband's return almost coincided.
"You went that far out of stubbornness? Filing for divorce isn't something you do lightly. This is going too far, just to upset us."
In his mind, I was a capricious woman acting out of a little rebellious spirit. I decided to play along with his perception and feigned indignation.
"After all, you've been ignoring me, just having fun with your mom. I'm fed up with always being sidelined. Why am I always left out?"
My exaggerated sulking hit the mark with him. He's the kind of man who loved when women showed such dependent attitudes towards him. Perhaps my act was convincing, or maybe he just wanted to believe it, but he was completely taken in. He became more accommodating, quickly agreeing to favorable terms regarding the division of our assets. He thought he'd humor my stubbornness until I was satisfied. He believed that once I felt better, we could remarry and resume our old life. but I no longer had feelings for him. I had divorced him to prioritize myself, so there was no way I'd go back to living with him. After completing all the troublesome procedures for the division of assets, I began looking for a new place to live. I fell in love with a convenient high-rise apartment near my workplace and decided to buy it on a whim. I hoped this new home would mark a fresh start in my life. While I enjoyed my days working and living at my own pace, one day, out of the blue, my ex-husband and mother-in-law came to visit. I hadn't given them my address. My mother-in-law made a scene in the building's entrance, continuously calling out my name. Not wanting to inconvenience my neighbors, I reluctantly welcomed them at my door. "Why here?" "Oh, it's a private investigator. I was worried about how you were doing, and Mom suggested we should check up on you," my ex-husband replied nonchalantly. Even though our legal ties had been severed, I was chilled to the bone knowing he'd gone to the lengths of hiring a detective without my knowledge. Stunned, I only thought about how to get them out, while my former mother-in-law, despite her age, acted carefree and childish. She tried peering into my house, bending over to see inside and just doing as she pleased. Just as I was about to reprimand her, she blurted out, "Your place isn't as shabby as I thought. It's quite nice. I could even live here with you." "Excuse me?" Flabbergasted, my mind went blank. I hadn't expected her to suggest living together, and her smile was downright eerie. I couldn't understand why she'd make such a proposal and pondered my next move. My ex-husband, grinning, agreed with her. "You must be lonely living here all by herself. That's why I brought Mom along today. Let's let bygones be bygones, okay?" He continued making decisions without my input. And it was clear from their actions that they both disregarded my wishes. "Absolutely not. Please leave. I don't need your forgiveness. Please, never come back." Having expected me to readily agree, my ex-husband was stunned.
"What? Why? Are you serious? Why are you saying this? Bob came here for you."
They were clearly surprised by my refusal. In my ex-husband's mind, I was still the stubborn wife trying to give them a hard time. He began to act arrogantly, as if he was the one bending over backward, doing me a favor by forgiving me.
"You're gonna regret being lonely without us, you know?"
"That's fine. Please leave. You're not welcome here, and I'm done with both of you." His perception was warped solely by his own needs, and he had no intention of understanding my perspective. Even when I made my refusal clear, he still believed I was just being stubborn. Laughing off my words, he tried to push past me into the house. Being a man, he easily overpowered me, and I ended up stumbling and falling in the hallway.
"Ah!"
A surprised shout escaped me, and shortly after, my neighbor's door opened. My ex-husband, trying to rush inside, bumped into me. The puzzled neighbor, seeing my distress, promptly went to call for help after I begged.
"Please, call the police." "Hey! What the hell are you saying?"
In my eyes, this was trespassing. When I also called the police and they found out they'd received 2 calls about the same incident, they quickly dispatched a patrol car. My neighbor, trying to protect me, let me in and locked the door. Outside, my ex-husband and his mother began pounding on the door, shouting their grievances loudly.
"It's a misunderstanding. I'm her husband. We just came to visit. Hey, don't touch my mom. Catherine, please, tell them. It's your fault for not giving us your address. You. Not only have you tarnished Bob's reputation, but now you're doing this to me? Come out and apologize."
His yelling was incredibly loud. Since it was a holiday and many of the neighbors were home, it drew quite a crowd, turning into quite the spectacle. Luckily, even though I was new to the apartment complex, I'd been actively involved in community gatherings and was well liked for being helpful. Even with the disturbance caused by my ex-husband's unexpected appearance, the neighbors were sympathetic and understanding. With testimonies from me, my neighbor, and other residents, my ex-husband and his mother were taken into custody for trespassing. Despite the inconvenience, My neighbor mentioned working in the legal field and even introduced me to a lawyer who specialized in stalking. Come to think of it, my ex-husband worked in legal affairs too, but seemed entirely oblivious to the laws he was breaking. He probably still is. Then, unexpectedly, my suspicion was confirmed in the most unforeseen way. It all started with a call from a mutual female friend, someone both my ex-husband, Bob, and I knew from high school. She mentioned having seen Bob walking closely with a young child. It hadn't even been several months since that unannounced visit of his. Could it be that Bob, who had hoped to reconcile with me, already had a new lover? If so, that's his business and none of mine. But, would his mother approve of him dating a woman who was divorced and had a child? Having already consulted a lawyer about Bob, I decided to hire an investigator. A reputable detective agency, hired through my lawyer's firm, started looking into him. And the findings were shocking. Bob had been having an affair even before our divorce. Even though I had long moved on from him, the sense of betrayal was profound. It felt as if the rug had been pulled out from under me multiple times. In Bob's mind, his world is distorted to fit his needs. He seems to place his mother at the top, with women, including me, ranked below, as lesser beings to ridicule and belittle. Including me, he seemed to think it was fine to mock and belittle any woman, considering them inferior beings. Given such hierarchical thinking, I could somehow make sense of his erratic actions. Having a wife while cheating, presuming it's natural to get back with an estranged wife, and all the while maintaining a relationship with his mistress, to Bob, all this seemed perfectly logical. With disbelief, I continued reading the investigator's report. Apparently, even though he had no intention of marrying her, he had hinted at a future to the woman he was cheating with. He gave her hope to keep their relationship alive. And my worst fear was confirmed. The young child he was seen walking with was, in fact, the child of his affair. He had been leading a double life. And the child was born around the same time as our marriage. The complexity of the situation made me nauseous. I was furious, so I sent a letter to his mistress, telling her everything. When she found out about everything, she was livid. She was enraged that while hinting at marrying her, he hadn't given up on reconciling with me, and she accused him of marriage fraud. But just hinting at marriage isn't grounds for a case. I thought she'd probably let it slide, but then it was discovered that Bob had taken a substantial amount of money from her under the guise of wedding expenses. And the money? It went to his mother. Her extravagant tastes knew no bounds, and her demands only escalated. To appease his angered mother after our altercation, Bob had booked an expensive suite on a cruise ship and planned an overseas trip. The money was intended for that purpose. Bob's mistress seized this opportunity and managed to press charges. My ex-husband faced claims for division of property from me, child support payments for the child he had with his mistress, and was charged with fraud. His savings quickly depleted. He had been frequently mooching off his mother anyway, so he didn't have much saved up. Their impressive family home was foreclosed on, yet the debts kept piling up. I had settled the matter of property division, so I had severed ties with my ex-husband. However, the situation with him and his mistress was a different story. They did have a young child together, after all. He quickly fell behind on child support, and his mistress was furious. His misdeeds were all exposed at his workplace after she stormed in, shouting at him. Despite working in the legal field, he had had frequent troubles with women and was in the middle of a trial for fraud. Naturally, he had kept all this hidden from his employer. His shady dealings became well known, and his reputation at the company plummeted. He was moved off the projects he had been handling, sidelined to insignificant roles, and the bad rumors never stopped. He couldn't handle the situation and resigned. When he tried to find another job, his fraud charges were already well known in his industry, making it hard for him to find a position. The mistress didn't let him forget about his criminal record, and once he realized he couldn't be picky about work, he ended up juggling multiple demanding physical labor jobs, day and night, just to keep up with the child support payments. Furthermore, his mother disappeared, pushing him to the brink of despair. Once she saw her son being sued, quitting his job, and drowning in debt, she swiftly disappeared, not wanting to get involved. However, she couldn't curb her own extravagant spending habits and ended up accumulating a lot of debt herself. With no son left to mooch off of, she continued her lavish lifestyle of buying high-end brand goods and indulging in luxurious meals, further deepening her debt. My ex lived a lonely life in a cramped apartment where he could hear his neighbors' voices distinctly. To make matters worse, a couple with a volatile temper recently moved in next door, frequently erupting in loud arguments. As for me, I continued to work hard in my role as a sales representative. I've taken on many new projects, achieving groundbreaking results time and time again. Having more time for myself now, I've also increased my study hours, expanding my expertise. Thanks to my specialized knowledge, I've gained the trust of my clients, and the company's revenue has surged. Not only am I viewed as a potential female executive, but there are even higher positions that I am considered for. Of course, I plan to work hard and contribute to the company. After all, it's my life. I should spend it doing what I love, living proudly and confidently. It's our wedding day, why isn't the bride and groom here yet? Hurry up. As I was going about my day as usual, my phone rang. Wondering who it might be, I was told something utterly confusing. Wait, what? I got married 3 years ago. I already have kids, so I had no idea why they were saying I was the bride. Huh? From the other end, there was a momentary silence, possibly as taken aback by my response as I was by their statement. We both seemed puzzled. Just when I thought it might be a wrong number, the caller said something completely unexpected. My name is Katherine Johnson, 32 years old. I'm a middle school teacher and I have 2 children, a 2-year-old and a newborn. Currently, I'm on a 6-month parental leave, dedicating my time to taking care of my kids. I'm really grateful to my workplace for being so understanding and accommodating about taking leaves. Though I've gotten a bit used to parenting since this is my 2nd child, it's still a challenge and I often find myself sleep deprived. It's wonderful that my children are lively and energetic, but they can be quite noisy and tend to cry a lot, which means I don't get deep sleep. Trying to ensure that my working husband doesn't get sleep deprived always ends up wearing me out. My husband works as a doctor, and the last thing I want is for him to make decisions with a foggy mind due to lack of sleep. So, whenever our child cries at night, I comfort them in a separate room from where my husband sleeps. My husband might be often busy and not at home, but whenever he's around, he's very involved in childcare. This makes everything feel less overwhelming. On his days off, my husband watches the kids, allowing me to get some much-needed rest. I often find myself thinking how lucky I am to have married such a wonderful person. Our days are hectic, but together, we've managed to build a happy life, supporting and helping each other. Then one day, after I'd managed to get my energetic kids to take a nap and was enjoying a brief moment of relaxation, the phone rang again. Checking the caller ID, I saw the name of a college classmate, which made me feel a bit weary. This classmate's name is Bob Miller. For some reasons, I've always been somewhat uncomfortable around him. Back then, we were both in the same department, aiming to become middle school teachers. We had interacted a few times, and he seemed spirited and motivated at that time. He came across as the life of the party. Since our conversations were mostly about class assignments, I didn't know him that well, and I had no reservations about him. My perception of him changed during our shared internship. During this time, Bob acted self-centered, often disregarding my opinions and even blaming me for his mistakes. No matter how many times I pointed out his errors, he never accepted his faults. It felt like talking to a brick wall, he never listened. He believed he was acting with good intentions, never realizing the inconvenience he caused to others around him. So, even when I corrected him, he remained stubborn, forcing me to clean up after his messes. Thankfully, both our internship supervisor and university professors were understanding and stood by me, allowing me to complete the internship successfully. I grew to strongly dislike Bob after this experience and sighed with relief when our internship ended, thinking I wouldn't have to interact with him anymore. But that relief was short-lived. Because we were at the same internship site, I often found myself dealing with Bob's issues. This, unfortunately, gave him the impression that I was interested in him. He became overly familiar and clingy, acting as though we were in a romantic relationship. I tried clarifying the misunderstanding, but he brushed it off, suggesting that I was just shy. "You're always so kind to me. You like me, don't you?" The only reason I communicated with him was due to our shared internship. Despite my clarifications, his puzzling confidence made him persistently clingy, which really wore me down. No matter how often I told him, his overfamiliarity and closeness always made me uncomfortable. Luckily, graduation was on the horizon, and with the support of my friends, my time dealing with him was relatively brief. My friends played a crucial role in creating distance between Bob and me. After that, due to working at different places, our interactions were limited to distant glimpses during extracurricular activities and school events. Though we hadn't spoken in a decade, I hoped Bob might have matured and reflected on his past actions. However, even the mere thought of interacting with him, especially when tired, was draining. Remembering Bob only brings back negative memories, often filled with miscommunications and having to explain the same thing multiple times. So, I had been avoiding him. But the persistent ringing of the phone disrupted my peace. Thinking it might wake up the kids, I reluctantly answered. Wondering what he could want, Bob's initial words rendered me speechless. "Hello?" After complaining about my delayed response, he said, "It's your wedding day. Why aren't you here? Get here quickly." "Wait, what? I got married 3 years ago." His words filled my mind with confusion. I hadn't communicated with him in 10 years, so such a message was utterly unexpected. Baffled, I inquired if he had the right person. "Huh?" When I informed Bob that I was already married, he seemed confused for some reason. I assumed he would soon realize his mistake and hang up, but instead, he made another bizarre statement. "We're in trouble. Everything for the wedding is set. Just come over quickly." For some odd reason, he seemed desperate to have me at the wedding venue, which left me increasingly puzzled. "You should be talking to your fiancé, not me." I thought I was pointing out the obvious, yet Bob kept urging me to come, saying the venue was nearby. I could faintly hear voices in the background, suggesting that the bride and her side of the guest list were absent. Still, I could hear voices from the groom's side showing their confusion. It appeared Bob was genuinely conducting a wedding. Given I had no connection to this and was clearly an outsider, combined with my fatigue from childcare, my patience with Bob's inexplicable behavior was wearing thin. "Listen, I've been married for 3 years and have kids. What are you talking about?" I struggled to comprehend Bob's ramblings, but tried to stay as calm as possible while questioning him. But Bob didn't give a clear answer and just kept insisting I come to the venue.
You have to come. Everything's ready. If you don't, we'll have to pay cancellation fees. Just wear the wedding dress.
He persisted. Despite my repeated refusals, citing my existing marriage and current childcare duties, Bob was unyielding. The back and forth continued to the point where I lost my temper and shouted, "Stop calling me with this nonsense." Ultimately, I hung up, frustrated. My rare moment of relaxation was ruined, leaving me in a terrible mood. But why on earth was he so insistent on having me at the wedding? The unknown reason left me feeling uneasy. That night, I discussed the matter with my husband upon his return from work. "That's pretty creepy. Given how he doesn't seem to understand things, we should be cautious," he advised, even suggesting we consult the police. The situation reminded him of stalking cases, and he seemed genuinely concerned. "I don't think we need to go that far," I reassured him. After hanging up the call from Bob, I began to calm down, thinking that it was just a one-time thing. However, with my husband expressing his concerns, I started to wonder if Bob had any sense of common decency. But considering he was a working adult, I felt that perhaps I was worrying too much. Yet, in the following days, persistent calls from Bob confirmed my anxieties, and I realized that my husband's words were not exaggerated. As a result, I decided to be cautious, not venturing out alone, and resolved to contact the police if needed. Ignoring his persistent calls, a few days later, my home intercom buzzed. Curiously, I grabbed my phone to be ready to call for help if needed, and to my shock, there stood Bob. He shouldn't have known my new address since our student days, so seeing him in front of my home sent chills down my spine. Relieved I hadn't opened the door, I inquired about his visit via the intercom. While I'd rather not have responded, he kept ringing the bell, causing my kids to become concerned.
Hey! Since you wouldn't answer my calls, I thought I'd come over and talk directly.
Bob said cheerfully, his smile unnerving me. I asked how he knew my address. And he mentioned having asked around our college acquaintances. It wasn't easy, you know. No one wanted to tell me. He admitted. While feeling angry at whoever revealed my address, I continued to deal with him through the intercom.
It's inconvenient talking like this, let me in.
He insisted. Despite his nagging, I refused entry and urged him to get to the point. When he finally started explaining, it was headache-inducing. He had called me to the wedding venue the day before the ceremony because his fiancée had vanished, and he wanted me to fill in for her to avoid cancellation fees. I met my fiancée on a free dating app. Maybe that's why she lacked common sense since it was free. Bob complained. While he ranted about his fiancée, I thought they seemed a perfect match, given his unreasonable actions. And sure enough, without a bride, the wedding was a disaster. Bob was apparently scolded by his family and relatives. And had to pay the cancellation fees.
Now, since you didn't come, you should cover half of the costs.
He claimed. What are you talking about? I exclaimed, my jaw dropping. Unbelievably, Bob wanted me to pay, saying that he was being generous in only asking for half.
I had nothing to do with your wedding.
I firmly refused, but he kept blaming me. Feeling overwhelmed and unable to handle the situation, I threatened to call the police. That seemed to deter him, and he finally seemed ready to leave, but not before saying, "You didn't show up when I asked, so I'm gonna send you the bill. Make sure you pay." However, Bob insisted that I pay him before finally leaving. The audacity of his demands, coupled with the fact that he'd come to my house uninvited, left me mentally exhausted. Once I confirmed he was gone, I felt drained and slumped down in relief. Later, a detailed invoice and a letter insisting on how much I should pay were sent to me. Feeling overwhelmed, I consulted my husband. He too was taken aback, not expecting anyone to act in such a manner. Together, we brainstormed how to handle the situation. A few days later, after leaving our kids at their grandparents', we headed to the address mentioned in the letter. Upon seeing the address, my husband felt a sense of recognition. When we rang the bell, a couple answered the door and were surprised to see my husband.
"Why is the doctor here?"
It turned out, my husband was their family physician. Never had I imagined that Bob's parents would know my husband, reminding me of how small the world can be sometimes.
"We apologize for the sudden visit. But it seems your son has been pressuring my wife to pay for his wedding expenses."
My husband explained succinctly. The couple, clearly shocked, hurriedly called Bob. While waiting for him, we provided a more in-depth explanation, showing them the invoice and letter. Seeing the documents, they sighed heavily and looked troubled.
"We're so sorry about our foolish son's behavior. We had no idea he was doing something like this."
They apologized. Soon, Bob arrived, nonchalantly asking,
"Why did you call me back suddenly? Oh, did you come to pay?"
Thinking we'd come to settle the bill, Bob looked pleased until his father reprimanded him.
"What do you think you're doing, demanding money from someone who had nothing to do with your wedding?"
Yet, Bob remained unfazed by his parents' scolding. At that point, my husband sternly said,
"You've been harassing my wife to pay for your unrelated wedding expenses.
We can report this to the police, you know." "Who the hell are you?" Bob responded initially dismissively. But when he learned that the stranger was my husband and also a doctor, his attitude shifted. When my husband revealed the reason for our visit, Bob instantly started to act flustered, trying to dodge the situation.
"I wasn't harassing her. She just owes me that money," he declared.
Despite our confrontation, he persisted with his demand, coming up with various justifications. It seemed like he genuinely believed what he was saying, making me think this was going to be a long conversation. I was feeling really frustrated. Just listening to Bob's side wouldn't resolve anything. He seemed unaffected even by his parents' scolding. So, I decided to start asking him methodically to understand why this was happening. Although he was a teacher and supposed to be mature, I felt drained having to handle him as if he were a child.
Why didn't you first reach out to your fiancé before contacting me?
Why? I asked, believing he would have had numerous ways to contact his intended. I had been too eager to end the call when he'd phoned and hadn't inquired about this. I tried many times but couldn't reach her. That's why I asked you to stand in. Bob replied nonchalantly. However, when both his parents and my husband gave him stern looks, he finally seemed to feel a bit uncomfortable. Towards me, he had a big attitude and was rather self-centered in his narrative. Yet, when cautioned by my husband, a doctor, he became more subdued. It appeared he respected titles more than people. The realization that such a person was teaching impressionable middle school students made me apprehensive. Still, I continued, now curious about his fiancée. Turned out, he had started dating her about 6 months ago after meeting on a dating app. After introducing her to his family, marriage was expected, and they decided to go with the flow. She apparently didn't have any immediate family, so the wedding talks progressed rapidly. They both had been on board at that time. But then she suddenly said she can't get married and became unreachable. Bob added. We had everything ready for the wedding, and all the guests were invited. It's hard to call it off just because the bride isn't available. He recalled that I worked at a nearby middle school and assumed I'd still be single, hence his call. You had a crush on me, right? So, I thought this would be perfect. Plus, you get to wear a free dress and enjoy a feast. It's all good, right? Hearing Bob's absurd reasoning, I was taken aback. Firstly, I'd never been interested in him, and being assumed as perpetually single was irksome. His parents were clearly shocked by his audacious claims as well. Despite my growing mental distress, I continued to ask questions and eventually found out that his fiancée's name was Lily Young and she worked as a nurse at the same hospital where my husband practiced.
I probably know her. I'll let her know.
My husband said, a puzzled expression crossing his face after hearing the name of the fiancée. From Bob's explanation, we couldn't grasp the full picture. Thus, we decided to reach out to the fiancé through my husband to discuss the matter. I believed that if the involved parties talked it out, the issue would be resolved. But just when I thought the matter was settled, I received a call from the fiancé a few days later.
I heard from the doctor. I sincerely apologize for dragging you into this.
Lily, who was Bob's fiancée, apologized in a calm and respectful manner for the chaos caused. Given the impression I had of Bob, I was secretly taken aback by Lily's courteous demeanor. I felt that perhaps my husband's odd reaction when mentioning he knew Lily was because he was aware that she wouldn't behave so irrationally. Lily expressed her wish to discuss the matter in person.
I've heard his side, but it's still confusing. I'm sorry, but can we meet to clear things up?
Feeling curious about how things escalated to this point, I agreed. We met at Bob's family home, where his parents, Lily, and I gathered to hear the whole story. We were informed that the wedding had actually been called off 2 months prior. Contrary to Bob's claim that it was only the day before, which shocked us. Moreover, after canceling the wedding, they had already paid the necessary fees. After wrapping up these matters, Lily had parted ways with Bob. However, out of the blue, he called her, insisting she attend the wedding ceremony the next day. Having received a sudden call from Bob asking me to stand in as the bride, I could relate to Lily's confusion.
We had already cancelled the wedding and were no longer seeing each other. When I asked why he was still going through with the ceremony, he just said something like, because it's all set up, which sounded like he was just joking around. I immediately hung up and blocked his number.
It became evident that Bob's version of events was far from the truth, leaving everyone dumbfounded.
We always thought you two were getting along just fine. Why didn't you tell us when you decided to call off the wedding?
His father, still in disbelief, questioned the lack of communication and courtesy. Under normal circumstances, an apology or explanation would be expected.
I was planning to come over and explain, but Bob insisted he would handle it.
Lily responded. She was aware of how thrilled Bob's relatives had been about the wedding. However, after the breakup, she intended to formally address the matter, but Bob stopped her.
You don't need to come over. It'll just upset my parents more.
I'll handle it, Bob had told her.
That's really lacking in manners, don't you think?
She always believed that a final greeting was just common courtesy, but Bob strongly objected to it. Knowing how happy Bob's parents were when the engagement was announced, she just let it be.
I should have at least secretly informed you. I'm so sorry.
And she apologized for the whole mess. From all this, it became clear that Lily wasn't at fault. But everyone was puzzled why Bob was still preparing for a wedding even after canceling and paying the fees. Having canceled the wedding and breaking off the engagement, there seemed to be no clear reason why Bob still wanted to hold the ceremony. Then, with a straight face, Bob said,
I already told people I was gonna get married. Backing out now would be so embarrassing. That's why I reversed the cancellation.
Bob's reasoning was that it was too embarrassing to call off a wedding after announcing it, and he didn't want to pay the cancellation fees, hence, he continued with the wedding preparations. I thought asking someone to step in as a bride on your wedding day would be more embarrassing. I seriously began to wonder how Bob's mind works.
The planner was happy when I said I wasn't gonna cancel the wedding, so I figured it's best to go on with it.
He thought he could just have a regular wedding ceremony without actually getting legally married and, despite being separated, he contacted Lily to attend the ceremony.
We have a fancy dress and a feast prepared. Why wouldn't you come?
Everyone was taken aback by Bob's nonchalance. Holding what's supposed to be the most important ceremony of one's life just for show, and not telling even your close family and friends about it? Everyone was furious and demanded Bob to bear all the costs. After all the chaos caused by Bob's recklessness, this seemed only fair. But Bob started whining, claiming he didn't have that kind of money. Yet, where did the money Tom had paid for the wedding cancellation go? If the cancellation was reversed, that money should have been returned, so he should be able to pay for it. While I was pondering this, Lily suddenly grabbed Bob's wrist.
You bought another one, didn't you?
On Bob's wrist was an expensive-looking watch.
The reason I called off our wedding is because of your outrageous spending, Bob. Spending $5,000 on a coat or $4,000 on shoes. I can't be with someone who doesn't listen and spends money recklessly. But it was the last piece and on sale. I had to buy it. I don't have any debts, so what's the big deal?
Turns out, Bob used the cancellation money to splurge on luxury brands. He buys impulsively when he wants something. Certainly, with such behavior, their marital life would have been a tough one. Although he isn't in debt now, it seemed likely he would end up borrowing money just to satisfy his shopping urges. The teacher's salary isn't that high to afford such luxuries. Ordinarily, he'd be bankrupt by now. I wondered where he was getting all this money from. The person who was most infuriated by all of this was Bob's mother.
You don't save, and you don't contribute a cent to the household. Is this where your money has been going?
Bob lived at home because his workplace was nearby, relying on his parents for rent and even groceries. Initially, when he started his job, he wasn't earning much and didn't have significant savings, so his parents didn't particularly ask him to contribute financially to the household. But even after a decade, he still didn't contribute to household expenses and claimed to have no savings. His parents found this strange, but never imagined he was spending on such extravagances. They had been concerned, but trusted Bob when he assured them he was managing his finances and planning for the future. It's natural for parents to trust their grown-up children when they say they're okay. Bob, now in his 30s, neither helped with house chores nor contributed financially, fully relying on his parents. He could afford such luxuries by spending his entire salary on his whims. But with this wedding fiasco and learning about Bob's spending habits, his parents decided they won't pamper him anymore.
Listen here. You'll pay every penny of the cancellation fee yourself. Don't you dare burden others with your problems.
Bob's father yelled furiously, and Bob finally fell silent, nodding with a pale face. Later, it turned out that Bob had been asking several people for my address. Among them, someone who found his behavior suspicious reached out to me. Once I explained the situation, word of Bob's misconduct quickly spread among the school staff. From the beginning, parents didn't think highly of Bob at school as he didn't seem to take his students' concerns seriously. Students saw him as a friendly and approachable teacher, but not one to go to with serious concerns. As a result of the circulating rumors and the uncomfortable environment, it seems he resigned from his teaching position. His parents, having had enough of his irresponsibility, seemingly kicked him out of their home. Without any savings, Bob resorted to selling his luxury goods to find a place to live and is apparently now living in poverty. Moreover, he didn't have the money to pay the cancellation fee and ended up in debt. So, it looks like he's gonna be stuck in this poor lifestyle for a while. Because of all this, he apparently doesn't have the energy to come at me with any more crazy ideas. Furthermore, his parents, wondering where they went wrong in raising him, apologized to me. They assured me they'd keep a close eye on him so he wouldn't cause any more trouble. If his stricter parents are now watching over him, I doubt I'll ever encounter Bob again. I finally felt relieved, knowing I wouldn't have to deal with him. As for me, I've been busy with childcare as usual, but with my maternity leave coming to an end, I'm preparing to return to work. I always knew that small actions could lead to unexpected situations, but never thought I'd get dragged into something like this despite being cautious. I hope nothing like this ever happens again, but if it does, I've decided I'll handle it calmly and safely.